Our series continues today, and we really appreciate your time and attendance. We know everyone's very busy, but we think you'll find today's topic very informational and some information you can take back and use internally within each of your organizations. Today, as we talk about resiliency and recovery, when you think of really what drives your business, three elements that we typically try to cover here in our rescue webinars. One is systems, the other is data and people. Those are the three elements. And systems, when you look at systems, typically they are the engine on which your business relies every day. And on the data side, it's really the information necessary to drive your business functions. And then, of course, on the people side, the people really, they're the driver that ensures that your business remains up and running in the event of an interruption. So remember, systems, data, and people. Interestingly enough, when you talk about this, there's two elements. There's typically, to tackle these issues, there's recovery and there's resiliency. At Rescue, we talk about the fact that resiliency is essentially a rapid recovery versus in an environment that may be up and hot or warm that you can fail over to or recover very quickly in. That's resiliency with us. And we think about recovery, that's typically where you're taking your tapes and doing a cold restore of your data and systems. So resiliency today, that's what we're going to tackle. When we talk about leverage your existing technology for resiliency and recovery, we're tackling the two elements combined, systems and data. When you think about all that's been happening, think about the rain today out in the Denver area. They're getting blasted with rain, and I think about what's happened back in Atlanta where we are located back in 2009. Severe rain. It was epic rainstorms that flooded many parts of the Atlanta metropolitan area, and essentially that's what Denver's faced with as we speak to you today. Yesterday was the tragic anniversary, 12-year anniversary of 9/11. My point is disasters do happen. They take the form of many shapes and sizes, but at the end of the day, they do happen. We have a motto around here talking about testing, making sure that you are prepared. If you don't test, chances are you will not recover. So we are big proponents in testing. Well, as we get started with our webinar, I'm really pleased to share with you that Tony Klinger will be making the presentation today, and formerly with IBM, a great background with TSM, very experienced on the TSM side of things, and he brings a wealth of information to Rescue and to our customer base, and he's helped a lot of organizations with implementations of their DR strategies. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Tony Klinger. Welcome, Tony, and again, welcome, listeners.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for your time. So we'll jump right in here and talk a little bit about the overview of the presentation. And as you take a look at the slide here, we'll talk about the flexibility of leveraging what you have as your existing technology. And the flexibility component of this is there's multiple layers that you can manage replication and different ways that you can execute the replication. Talk a little bit about the replication management, which is who or where do you manage replication? Who's responsible for it? How do you make sure that the replication occurs? And then ultimately anything associated with new technologies or new ideas or thinking outside of the box or trying to deploy a new solution, how is this going to drive down cost or improve my recovery times over the long haul? It's not just about investing in a new technology for the sake of a new technology. It's about driving down cost, return on your investment, and making sure that you're getting value out of this change. So this slide here, we'll just call it a high-level solution page. This is kind of a generic Visio or diagram of a typical customer's environment. Now, obviously, yours may be far more complex, or in some cases may be more simple, but this is just a straightforward, generic, single-site solution idea where you've got some level of physical or virtual machines running, some disk attached to that, or a rack of data attached to that. Inside that rack could be any type of hardware. Could be any type of software running inside of there. You could be doing anything from physical tape in that replication area to a virtual tape to disk-based to backup recovery software in there. And so that's the basis. That replication device is our basis, or the basis for this discussion today, in identifying what technologies you have in play or your customers may have in play for that replication. So really what you want to try to do is look internal first. Look at what you have. What components of your infrastructure already enable you to execute replication that will allow you to get that data offsite and have a business resiliency or resiliency in your business from a data technology or from an application standpoint. This is about flexibility. This whole idea of leveraging your existing technology is around flexibility and how to improve your recovery times and improve your recovery strategy on the other side in the event of a disaster, the other side being that right side, the recovery center. So talking about this solution, you'll notice there's a few assumptions here. Obviously that you have a recovery site or that you have some destination to store your data, to replicate your data to, somewhere to recover your infrastructure in the event of a disaster. Now, not all of our customers and not all of your customers or your infrastructure, your environment may not be at this level. But the thing here is this is kind of a desired end goal. It's kind of generic. It's simple. It's easy to understand. In all of these scenarios, as we talk through the different layers of replication or replication stack as it's listed here, there's some assumptions. The assumption is you're going to invest in the hardware on the recovery site or invest in a solution at your recovery site to provide hardware in the event of a disaster. Replication of data with no data or no hardware, no infrastructure to run that data is just data off-site. It doesn't have much value because of the time it's going to take you to get similar assets to that site in order to leverage the data that's on there. So there's different levels of complexity in the long-term solution here, but taking a look at this on the surface, we're going to talk specifically about getting your data into or leveraging an appliance or application that you already have at your production site and how to get that data off-site to a facility or a location that will allow you to have quick recovery in the event of a disaster. So the replication stack here, this is what we're going to kind of dive into. How do I do that replication? How do I get my data from my production site out to my recovery center so that I'm able to recover when I need to? We'll jump in a little bit first as we talk about the application layer. You've got an operating system / hypervisor layer that kind of sits in that middle tier, specifically there. And then you've got your backup recovery application, disk hardware, and virtual tape. Yeah, virtual tape is kind of an anomaly. You could put that into an application layer. You could kind of stick it into a backup recovery appliance, but it is unique in its own right because it's typically some sort of hardware appliance that's running a software layer on top of it. So with that being said, let's jump into the application layer here. We talk about application layer and we talk about recovery time. We talk about business critical applications. Typically, if you're going to replicate your data at the application layer, you're talking Tier 1, HA, absolute most business critical applications. Oracle, for example, SQL databases, database replication where you've got an active or an active standby replication. Exchange, same thing. You've got it mirrored, for lack of a better word, but you have data in production and a near instant copy or a near real-time copy of that data off-site. This typically requires a dedicated server at your recovery site. So you've got a server running in production, a server with similar hardware and capacity running at your DR site. You've got a network communication, and I failed to mention that on the previous slide. All of these make an assumption that you have network communication between those two sites. Obviously, it's impossible to replicate data without a highway or a mechanism to communicate between those two sites. So at the application layer, Tier 1, Priority 1, data sets, near real-time replication, very minimal downtime from a recovery standpoint. It's just a matter of redirecting your request or your data access to the other hardware at the other site. Bigger investment up front because you've got to have that dedicated hardware sitting there ready to go at all times. So if we move down the layer and we jump down into the operating system or the hypervisor, this is kind of a unique area. This seems to be where there's a lot of buzz and a lot of new features around replication and around data security and business resiliency. Obviously, IBM and AIX have had Power HA for quite some time. VMware has done a great job with Site Recovery Manager, SRM being an add-on feature to the VM layer. Hyper-V has the replication technology. One thing that's cool that I wanted to talk about here that bring to the audience's attention is a new and up-and-coming technology that is hypervisor agnostic, that can reach across the different hypervisors and leverage backups at an image level with seamless integration or seamless replication and quick recovery on the other side. Excuse me. So with Zerto, and that being Zerto, Zerto is kind of a new player in the area. It's stepped up and really come in, and it's changing the game a little bit, because what's cool is you don't have to buy your replication licensing just from VMware anymore. So competition drives down cost in most scenarios. Now you have a competitor to proprietary software companies, VMware, Hypervisor, or Hyper-V. You're driving down the cost of that replication software, and really it's a benefit to the customer, to the end user, to the organization that's looking for that replication. So with that being said, the hypervisor replication really changes the game for data center recovery or business resiliency, in that if you're running in a virtual machine environment, you've already done your physical to virtual migrations, you've reduced your footprint in your production infrastructure. How does that benefit you at a disaster recovery site? Well, you're able to deploy some technology, whether it's SRM, Zerto, whatever it might be. Some of the backup recovery appliances are doing a good job of moving into this area and embedding hypervisor image replication across the wire to benefit customers or organizations that have both physical and virtual environments. But the real nut of this, or the real point here, is you don't have to do it at an appliance level or at an application level or at an appliance level if you go down into the hardware stack or at the backup recovery layer if you don't want to. If you're a fully VM shop, you can leverage something like a Zerto or an SRM and replicate that data to the other side, have images, have hardware sitting over there, have a minimal set of systems dedicated to your recovery or to your replication, and then in the event of a disaster, should you need to spin up those virtual machines or need to recover your entire infrastructure, it's just a matter of adding hardware assets to your virtual farm and leveraging one of these technologies to recover the virtual machines in the event of a disaster. So this is not necessarily a backup recovery feature, but it's more of an operational recovery or an operational readiness, business resiliency recovery feature. So as we go down a layer, again, everybody, I shouldn't assume everybody, most organizations have some sort of backup recovery application deployed throughout their infrastructure. Whether it's listed here or not, these are all common backup recovery applications that customers are leveraging, whether it's Backup Exec with its new release of 2012 that has enabled site-to-site replication, or into a Veeam that is virtual machine backups with replication. And realistically, Veeam, because it has some retention capabilities, was kind of pulled down to the backup recovery layer. But you look through the list here, all of these have some sort of knowledge base or some sort of catalog that helps them do the backups, store the backups, maintain version, maintain retention, and then gives you an added feature of replication. With backup recovery applications, it's not so much an HA infrastructure anymore. You've kind of moved into a warm site solution for replication because you do have a component of recovery. You have a point that you'll have to go back to in time and restore the data from. Some of these have continuous data protection built into them, so they get that shorter recovery point, but you still have to suck some portion of data and retrieve, I shouldn't say suck, but retrieve some portion of data out of the catalog and out of the disk data store or tape data store that's associated with this application. So yeah, most of the products out there for backup and recovery have replication already as a feature. It's just a matter of licensing it, finding out the hardware requirements, identifying the network bandwidth that's necessary between the sites. The beautiful thing or the nice thing about this is you don't have to rip and replace in order to accommodate this. Most of the products that you're using today have it. You just have to leverage that feature and move into that warm/hot site solution. So as we get into disk hardware and talking about the different technologies, disk hardware does have a slightly different feature or different challenge from backup and recovery application replication. In that disk replication, you run the risk of replicating corruption or replicating deficiencies or deleted data or missing data out of your infrastructure. You're strictly replicating at a hardware layer or a block layer in most of these cases. Some of them have some snap technologies which will build in some replication or retention features. But it's a different approach than doing it from a backup and recovery application layer. That's not to say that you can't do it as a hybrid where you combine both disk replication for business continuity and backup recovery replication for retention or for historical recovery. So as you see here, again, it's not an inclusive list, just a common set of appliances or technologies that we've run across lately. NetApp has its Snap Mirror technology. V7000 has its technology. Each of these players have their own technologies, and it's about licensing it, leveraging it. Yes, you may have to procure additional hardware, but your benefit in that recovery time is significant. You don't have to ship physical tapes. You don't have to worry about the same level of security of a tape falling into the wrong hand. What we typically see is a lot of customers doing a hybrid of some sort of disk replication for operational recovery. You've got kind of two components when you think about backup and recovery. You have operational recovery, which is what you're going to need in the event of a disaster. That 7-day or less, typically it's about 2 days, is about all a business will sustain a loss of data. So you're looking for that recovery point within 2 days, and that's where this tape replication, or excuse me, disk-based replication options that we're talking about here, whether it's backup recovery or disk-based, comes into play. Then the next layer of it is the Tier 2, Tier 3 data, the stuff that your business can function for maybe a week before you have to restore that data. That would be where I could see, or where we see a lot of customers leveraging the backup recovery technology as that replication feature. So as you look at these different technologies and these different features that you have, you also have to keep in mind that there is a prioritization of your applications and a prioritization of your data. So your recovery path has to relate directly to the critical nature of the data that you're recovering or the applications that you're recovering. So while we talk about all these different layers, there's not a single layer that will fit all of your needs. And in most cases, somebody's going to have an Exchange server because Exchange is deemed as a Tier 1 application, so Exchange may be in an HA scenario, whereas you pull your HR features down into a Day 3, Day 4 recovery, a Tier 3 kind of recovery model, and that may be replicated with a TSM or a net backup or a backup exec technology, that you know you can get to it when you need it, but it's not your priority one recovery app. So leveraging the different technologies that you have and identifying what features you have for replication is critical. So we'll move to one more layer, which kind of sits as a hybrid and potentially kind of is a third leg in the stool and maybe just an additional cost. But virtual tapes do have a play in the market. They do have a footprint. They have their benefits. Again, not a non-inclusive list here, but Falcon Store and Protect here, they integrate, say, with your backup recovery application, store data on some sort of disk, and then replicate the data from site to site. So they kind of manage a couple different components. So if you had a TSM server that's writing to a VTL, and then you allow the VTL to dedupe it and transmit that data across the wire, you can drive down the cost in how much data you need to store without affecting your front end from your backup recovery application, which then gives you the capability of keeping all your retention data on that appliance and replicate it across the wire. So you have an added feature there, but you also had an added cost because you brought in another software or hardware layer that sits in there and associates with your infrastructure. So I think that it needed to be included. I think it would have been a disjustice if we had just skipped past virtual tapes, because the virtual tape mindset was probably bigger in the last 5 years or so. It's got a footprint now in certain scenarios, but it's not as commonplace as it was about 5 years ago. Now that all the disk and hardware layers of technology have caught up and are allowing intuitive replication, you're seeing the virtual tape market kind of change a little bit. So still there, still an option, still a recovery strategy, still a replication point. Let's just say you put a virtual tape library behind your backup and recovery application, and you're able to write your net backup catalog backups to that VTL, replicate that across to the VTL layer. Then all you have is that one component, and you have everything, all your historical data available at your fingertips for recovery, in addition to having backup recovery layer recovery. One component that we didn't really talk about in that backup recovery layer, when you're replicating there, you're going to find that most of those products are going to require a media server or some sort of backup server on both sides to facilitate that communication and to stay in sync, because there is a catalog in play in all of those technologies, or most all of those technologies. Something has to keep up with the pointers to identify where the data sits on the back end or in the tape library. So each of these layers and these products in each of these layers have pros and cons. There's no silver bullet to every customer. And the point that I want to make out of talking through these different layers is these are all commonplace technologies. They all have features of replication. They all have features that can be used to facilitate business continuity and recovery. So as organizations start to look at how they're going to recover their data and how they're going to secure that data, it's imperative that they look inside before they start looking outside. I know there's hardware vendors, I know there's software vendors, everybody wants to say their product's better than the next. They're all good, or they wouldn't be around. I mean, they all have some benefit to them, or they would not survive. So the point is leveraging the technology that you have, identifying the features in that technology to determine which ones make the most sense for you as an organization trying to replicate data and reduce cost. Realistically, what the goal here is reducing costs and improving recovery time. So again, as we talked about earlier, organizations can use site-to-site replication, therefore they eliminate their need for tape. The goal here, drive down the cost of physical media, a failing technology or a technology that is fault tolerant. I shouldn't call it a failing, but a fault tolerant technology. So, I mean, data lock on physical tape is a real problem, is a real issue that exists. If you've got data that you have to retain for HIPAA requirements, PCI, whatever requirements, government or industry requirements that are in play, that data can be locked on physical media and lost. The recovery capabilities can be lost on it. Not to mention that physical tape does have a lifespan that is not infinite. It will eventually fail you. So eliminating that tape, creating replication, leveraging disk for that. Back to the assumption that I made earlier, we talked about some sort of internet connectivity between the two sites and the assumption that you have a disaster recovery site. Obviously, that's imperative. Is if you're going to do disaster recovery or you want to be able to recover your data, you got to have somewhere to write it to and somewhere to go, somewhere to be able to restore that data. And then the next layer here is, in all of these conversations or all these features that were laid out here, the main basis under the covers to all of this is some level of disk storage, whether it's slow-performing cheap or fast-performing expensive disk for recovery. But the point is, you're getting that data to disk. It's random access. It's not linear. You're getting away from that tape dependencies. If you've ever done a TSM, a recovery of your infrastructure with TSM or any of the other incremental forever kind of strategies, you will see the pain points of data spread across multiple tapes. Or if you've done net backup, backup exec, and some of the other technologies that require weekly full backups, you see the waste that's associated with storing data on tape. So the goal is, if you leverage the disk on the back end, you can take advantage of some of the features like deduplication and shrink that footprint of data, repetitive data that's stored in your backup infrastructure or in your business continuity strategy, whether it's HA or replicated or just straight through your backup infrastructure. And then ultimately, the last 2 points here is, think about the event of a disaster, and I'm just going to use a hurricane. Being somewhere on the coast, you've got an organization and their data center somewhere along the coast, and you hear for a couple of days there's a hurricane coming in, and you're storing your data with a local media vault company, and they've got your tapes there. When you go to get those tapes out, they're going to be on the same road or headed to the same airport as every person in that region that's trying to evacuate. If you're not timely in getting those tapes out, you have no recovery strategy because they're not going to get anywhere. You get log jams and gridlock coming out of some of these areas. It is a realistic event. It happens. I've heard numerous customers tell us that they couldn't get their data from their local geographical area out during hurricane, primarily because those are large events where customers or basically citizens are all trying to get out of harm's way as quick as possible. By leveraging some of these replication technologies, your data is safe well in advance of that event. So the point, again, back to the point, is get your data outside of harm's way, figure out a way to make your business more resilient. How do you improve your recovery? And then lastly, talking about security around your data. You have the capabilities to secure the pipe. You own that pipe from a replication. You may own the recovery site and have that data stored under physical security that you control. Or you're leveraging a colo facility and they have hardened security requirements around that. You get that added level of security. Physical tape loss is a huge risk in the industry, really in any business at this point. Data falling into the wrong hands, somebody getting a hold of a tape that they're not supposed to, puts not just you as a business at risk, but it puts your customers at risk and puts the general public at risk. We hear almost on a weekly basis where somebody's systems have been hacked or somehow somebody has either intentionally or unintentionally gained access to personal information of either our customers or ourselves, for that matter. And it's a serious situation. So security around the data, by eliminating that extra physical variable, which is physical tape, is a benefit in any of these solutions. So back to the high-level solution, just to kind of tie everything back together here and show you, the same image, just to tie everything together. The applications, the operating system, backup recovery layer, disk hardware, virtual tape. It doesn't really matter where the replication occurs. What the key component is, you understand the technologies that exist in your infrastructure, where the different pieces of replication may occur, how these different replication technologies can benefit our end user, our customer, or our organization with that recovery time. Again, in this scenario, we made the assumption you have a production site with some sort of device, whether it's software or hardware, that you can do replication. You've established an MPLS circuit across the wire, and you have a recovery center that's been identified, whether it's HA or disaster recovery, and then whether you use shared hardware through a DR provider or you're purchasing and providing your own hardware, whether it's a dev and test environment or you're repurposing in the event of a disaster. But in any of those scenarios, you have data in multiple places, you've gotten rid of the tape, you've reduced the vulnerabilities and the risk with tape, and you've improved your recovery capabilities, all under the guidance of trying to drive down recovery times. And obviously there's some initial costs. None of this stuff is necessarily free, but trying to reduce the cost and the risk associated with physical tape. So with that, I thank you for your time, and please submit any questions that you have, and I will turn it back over to Steve now.
And as we pull these questions down for our audience, I first and foremost want to apologize. I know that we had some technical difficulties, it sounds like, with folks hearing the initial intro to our webinar. So for that, we apologize. We will and have been taping this, so we will post this on our website. But just before we get into the questions, just a little rehash. When we started the intro, we talked about the fact that our rescue webinar series really focuses around three elements. Systems, which for us, it's the engine on which your business relies. We talked about data, the second element being information necessary to drive your business functions, and of course the third element being people, the drivers that ensure your business remains up and running. And we talked about the fact that our webinar series today was really around two of those three elements, systems and data. What we're saying is resiliency, creating resiliency in your infrastructure, because again, in our world, we see organizations with either recovery strategies, using traditional tape, showing up to a cold hardware, doing full restores from tape. That we're truly calling recovery. Resiliency for us is where there's a secondary infrastructure somewhere, whether it's your own company-owned infrastructure in another location or in a third party, that's actually set up with environmental so that you can recover rapidly. That's really what we call resiliency, having more of a dedicated solution in place. And what Tony's presentation was around today was making sure you can leverage what you have already. We know in our presentation we use a lot of different company acronyms and names of various products. We are not here promoting one over the other. Tony's point was really to make sure that we are sure that you have some of these technologies in your IT environment today. And how can you best leverage those assets that you already own for replication, resiliency, and recovery? And that's really where we excel in helping organizations drive down costs, because in many cases they have a lot of elements already in place. They just need to expand upon that footprint to give them that layer of resiliency and or recovery. So sorry I've backtracked a little bit here. Just wanted to make sure that those that did have the issues with hearing the webinar again lay the foundation for our discussion. We do have questions that have been submitted. I'd like to turn those in to Tony. I'll read those questions we have thus far, and we'll conclude with our questions. So again, thanks for bearing with us with those technical difficulties. Tony, the first question I have is, what do you see as the pitfall with us going it alone versus using a third-party provider to support the types of solutions you've discussed?
I mean, I guess it comes down to management, from a replication standpoint is who's going to manage that replication. How do you make sure that your data on both sides is in sync? If you've already got the skill sets and you're confident in your support team's capabilities to replicate, manage that replication, and execute the disaster recovery on the other side, then I think going at it alone is realistic. Looking at third-party providers that have specialized skill and pooled resources that may be doing half of their time on one account, half of their time on another account, they're able to leverage the experiences across multiple accounts to benefit you, so you have a stronger resource providing you, and you're not out providing a full FTE to somebody that's doing minimal, I'd say minimal, but reduced, not a full-time job. If your replication process is set up properly and is executing and performing well, there's really not going to be a huge overload of work for that individual to stay current and stay in sync with. So maybe leveraging a third-party provider can benefit you by reducing some cost. You're not taking the overhead of the resource. So it really comes down to how you replicate, at what layer you replicate, and then what your skill set is on your team and what your budget is. What makes sense to the organization. So there's not really a pitfall per se, but there are considerations, things to take into consideration as you're making that decision.
Thanks, Tony. Another question, second question is, I'm not an IT person, so can you help me better understand what the replication stack is?
Okay, so I guess as you take a look at the different components that make up IT, you've got, going back to, let's just take a menu for example, or maybe that's not a good scenario. If you're not familiar with IT and understanding the different components that make it up, you've usually got a physical layer, an application layer, a physical layer which consists of hardware, wires, cables. Then you have an application layer that runs there on top of an operating system layer. So if you take your laptop, you physically have an asset. When you turn it on, you log into Windows, and most of us do, maybe Linux or some sort of Apple operating system. But you log into an interface that welcomes you in, and then inside of that interface you have applications, Microsoft Word, Internet Explorer, those kinds of things that you would leverage to do what you want to do. So the same the same stack mindset comes into play with the replication. You've got physical layer, you've got, which is your disk, which can be, you know, tangible assets. Then you have an operating system layer, which is what typically runs on top of the physical device, and then on top of that you can have the application layer, just similar to the laptop, but it's kind of relating it to a common technology reference is the application stack or the technology stack. There's different components in there. Networking, if you get into that, if you get it out into the weeds, there's a stack associated specifically with network communication. So it's just kind of a common IT technology, and hopefully that helped. But realistically, you look at your laptop, you kind of have three interfaces that you're used to. You've got the physical, the operating system, which would be Windows, and then the applications on top of that.
Gotcha. Okay. Third question is, we're an Oracle NetApp shop. Is there any baseline we can use to understand how to price out the solution for our environment?
I mean, pricing for any sort of solutions is dependent. It's such a variable, and the standard IT answer here comes into play. And the quick answer is, well, it depends. You know, it depends on what technology you have, what software licenses you already have, what hardware components you already have or that you're leveraging. So as far as coming up with a pricing model, no, not per se, but there are, you know, variables that drive that pricing model.
And the second part from the same person is, do you have the resources to help us figure out what would work best for us?
Yes, absolutely. We have the team here that will come in and we've got a team that does consulting work, that can do business impact analysis type work that will identify what your data priority is, what your tiering of your data should be. So they'll do a business impact analysis. They'll work with you to identify the critical nature of each application, what recovery times are associated with each of those, and then a recovery option study on top of that BIA, which the recovery option study takes a look at the technology stack you have in play to identify what we can leverage or what you can leverage to meet those recovery times associated with each of those tiering, those application tiering or critical applications that you've tiered the priorities of. So what it is it's a team that will take a deep dive with you by interviewing you and your resources to figure out how to make that your solution the best that it can be to fit your fingerprint, as I talked about earlier. Each industry has, or each our organization has their own technology fingerprint.
Great, Tony, thank you. Well, those are all the questions that have been submitted. And again, once again, I want to say to our audience, thank you for spending your time with us today. We certainly respect and know that your time is very valuable. We hope that this has provided the information that you are looking for. Again, how to leverage your existing technology for resiliency and recovery. Any questions, please, even beyond our sign-off, feel free to forward those to Tony Klinger directly here at Course 360 on the Rescue Services side. And look for our future webinar announcements. We do this once a quarter, try to make this informational. And any new topics that you'd like us to address or speak to, please feel free to write those in as well. Send an email along to us, and we'll certainly change it up. But again, our focus is systems, data, and people. We'll give you your day back. And again, thank you, one and everyone, for joining us today for our Rescue webinar series. Bye for now.